The story begins in the Qingzhou Mountains, a beautiful place filled with a huge amount of spiritual energy, which local cultivators really liked. The main character of the manhwa is a guy named Chen Fung, an ordinary guy who was willing to work long and hard to gain greater power. He ended up in this world only 3 years ago, but managed to reach certain heights. His soul was transferred to the body of a deceased young man from the Daqian dynasty. Literature was highly valued in his family, so he used ancient poetry to gain the title of true thinker among his acquaintances. When the young man thought that he had reached certain heights in this world, something happened that he could not expect. It turned out that the world in which he was reborn contains not only ordinary people, but also those who are able to use spiritual power to create unusual things. The guy wanted to take this path of a magician, but none of the 5 main sects wanted to accept him. Yet he was quite mediocre, did not stand out for his talent or any special aspirations. Then an old man approached him and offered to join his clan, because he noticed potential in the guy. His bones were strong enough so that he could learn the secrets of Ching Yun. Only once looking at the skill of his new mentor, the guy understood how much potential was hidden in the technique of body control. The main character had already heard about this ancient sect from books. Ching Yun was not as famous as the other 5. The sect that was based on studying the art of the sword did not particularly care about any worldly goods or additional convenience. At first glance, this place seemed abandoned and forgotten, but our Chen Fung knew the truth about how valuable the Ching Yun heritage was. The 9th head of the sword sect was going to tell some details about what the young man would soon have to do. He had to find out this as a new follower of the sect. The master wanted the boy to understand one important thing. Becoming immortal and ascending to heaven were not the same thing. Our Chen Fung was ready for the test. He hoped that after going through a thorny road, he could become as cool a swordsman as Yoda from Star Wars. According to the old man, the path of the Taoist was only smooth and calm at first, but it was just an ordinary deception that destroyed many naive students. The master's joy was difficult to describe in words. He saw in the young man an intelligent student of the sect, but he still would not receive a salary until he became a full-fledged participant. Since the sect gave the young man the opportunity to become immortal, he could not demand money for this. He was ready to work for the well-being of the sect. The answer really turned out to be ideal. The old man was pleased because this greatly simplified cooperation with the main character. Although in fact the guy hoped that the sect that gives the path to immortality would not be poor, for today he was allowed to go about his business, and training was postponed until tomorrow. All members of the cult were gathered in the sect's dining room. This was an important meeting that would decide the fate of the entire organization. The great sects passed a law that prohibited the existence of small sects unless they met certain requirements, one of them being the 8-member rule. But the head believed that preserving the sect at any cost was their main task, to which each of the participants must make every effort. Things were not so bad because he promptly came across the main character, who was just looking for some sect to join. Everything was going well because they needed one participant, and the selected boy had no choice but to join their clan, because others had already refused. Xiao Yichai, the second disciple of the Ching Yun sect, was worried because they were actually deceiving the young man. They didn't even have any techniques. Only the old master was not a fool either. He planned that Jinyu would begin to teach the main character the way of the sword. This was the most complex and spectacular style. The first disciple of the sect was not sure that he could handle it. Ling Jinyu wanted to refuse, but the old man convinced him. Our boy was their last hope, so sect master Ching Yun ordered each of the disciples to mentor the Kohai for 2 months. Then they could avoid dissolution. The next day began quite briskly. The first student, Ling Jingyu, was ready to begin teaching the newcomer, even though this was only his first time. On the advice of their master, he planned to tell little things at a time, rarely answering questions and speaking vaguely to maintain an air of mystery. And to make everything seem even more spectacular, Lin wore a special uniform for the lesson, which he received as a reward for being one of the 500 best swordsmen. As soon as the young man noticed his mentor, he was immediately struck by his coolness. This is exactly how he imagined the Taoists, who had comprehended the secrets of this world. The first thing the main character must learn is the sign of the path of the sword. His older brother carved it on the floor right in front of the young man's feet. Only these scribbles were more reminiscent of one of the symbols in mathematics that a junior high school student tried to copy. But our boy was able to see the truth. It seemed to him that behind these nondescript stripes was hidden enormous experience and skill, which can only be comprehended through many years of training. The elder brother asked not to be upset if the student did not understand something. After all, this was his first time encountering the techniques of the sword school. Only this sign revealed to the main character some movements from the techniques. He saw them as if they were stills from the anime The Blade That Cleaves Demons, clearly and effectively. The mentor was very angry about this, because he believed that they were trying to deceive him. Even he himself did not see much meaning in this mark. Since the elder brother did not believe in the words of his student, the guy was ready to demonstrate everything clearly to confirm his words. Even the young man's proposal did not make his teacher change his point of view. He tried to say that he really understood his aspirations, but there was no hurry in the path of the sword. Even though the main character himself clearly understood the sign of the sword, he still had doubts because today was only the first day of their cultivation. It was impossible to ruin everything. Worried that the boy would leave them, and then this would lead to the closure of the sect, Lin decided to demonstrate several pretentious techniques. What was happening definitely fascinated the main character. He saw it when he had not yet become an inhabitant of this world. The first thing the master asked his student was what the Taoist path in mastering the sword means. The guy thought about this for quite a long time, but was still able to give an answer. The protagonist's answer turned out to be quite profound, because when Lin himself began, he answered the master that the path of the sword is the ability to play with a sword. It was impossible to show that the young man was already beginning to outshine his master, so the Taoist proudly declared that his student's answer was incorrect. This answer made the main character think that he was still green in this matter, so he was ready to heed the wisdom of his older brother. After thinking a little, our Chen Fung decides to say that the path of the sword is the sky, mountains, and seas. In his opinion, everything on earth was a sword for him. This answer amazed the master even more, because even experienced warriors could not come up with such a ratio. If the guy says that the sword is him, then you'll even have to shake his hand. Lin decided to keep the mystery until the end, so even though the protagonist's words did make sense, he dismissed them as the wrong answer. The young man, who had difficulty even getting into this sect, was very upset because he could be kicked out if he was too stupid and inept. So that the guy would not worry, the young master suggested asking another question, since the young man still could not give the correct answer to this one. The second question was, what is the final form of learning blade mastery on the path? The young man began to carefully think about it. In the protagonist's past life, there were many monotonous manhwas about spiritual endeavors, sects, and imbecile characters, so he assumed that it all came down to thinking about eternity. This answer was again incredibly accurate. Lin was already losing his composure and wanted to start praising the genius who had come to their sect. The young master, there was simply no point in pretending any further. The main character continued to worry, because he didn't want to work at McDonald's again to provide himself with food. But his mentor only sighed heavily and asked him not to work so hard. Even though the mentor asked not to put in too much effort, the only chance for the main character to become immortal was to reach the very top. The guy wanted to continue their training, then his master quickly descended from the mountain and pointed a blade towards his first student. This was a great chance for the mentor to check whether the main character really has impressive talent or was just lucky. In order not to accidentally get injured, after the master gave the blade to the young Padawan, he decided to move back a few dozen steps. The main character began to try to repeat the movements that he had previously seen through the mark. They were quite accurate, path, and very inept. Determining what kind of technique this was not a problem for the master. He immediately noticed Chen in the movement's Fenya style of Spring Thunderstorm. Because of the movements of the main character, a terrible roar thundered in the sky, but he himself did not immediately understand why everything happened exactly like that. Next, the young man began to repeat movements that, as if in a manga, were moving like a snake from top to bottom. His style changed to an autumn thunderstorm. This led to the appearance of special effects. The guy was amazed at his master because despite his young appearance, Lin was able to put so much knowledge into an ordinary sign. The final movement in the combination was the call of a winter thunderstorm. Every time the guy changed his stance, the sound of thunder could be clearly heard throughout the entire area. The master could not believe that the neophyte could use the technique of 4 thunderstorms. His face turned very pale. Chen Fung thought that he had made some kind of mistake again for his mentor to react this way, so he began to worry a lot about what had happened. The technique that the main character just used was invented by a master from one main sect, nicknamed the Master of Thunderstorms, and it took him many years to achieve this. The strength of a person who would use such abilities will depend on the number of movements that he knows. There are combinations from 12 to 96 blows. With each change of style, a thunderclap occurred. And if the master invested spiritual power into the blade, tangible lightning appeared instead of sound. The technique used by the main character indicated that he had mastered at least 48 movements. The master himself owned only 18 blades. The dreams of an excellent swordsman quickly turned into fragments because he could never imagine that he would be so easily beaten by some junior. The main character had never held a sword in his hands before, which means he simply could not master the technique of the power of 48 movements of 4 thunderstorms. The elder's face again raised certain doubts in the protagonist. He had no idea, because he did not yet understand that his strength was even higher than that of the sect master. He believed that even if he had no talent, giving up was the worst decision he could make in this situation. Since the older brother remained silent, the boy had to try to bring him to his senses so that they could continue training. The master pretended to be thinking about something, and then in an equally important tone asked if his student had any questions. The boy was very worried, because he thought that his abilities were at a very low level. He was not confident in himself, so he decided to find out the opinion of the master. Only in reality it was the other way around. Chen's abilities the Fen were so amazing that there is hardly another such talent in all sects. Jing Yun was also weighed down by the responsibility of the old man's words, because now the fate of their sect depended only on him alone. If the newcomer was not interested in joining their clan, the council would soon disband the entire organization, so the young master had to figure out how to lure the main character. Jing Yun's expression became more and more gloomy. The boy began to worry even more while his mentor tried to find the right reaction. To get the exact answer, our Chen Feng asked his teacher to speak directly. He is willing to know the results even if they are incredibly bad. Only even so, Jing Yun continued to remain silent, not knowing which side to approach because if he made a mistake, the student could be subdued by pride. There was a chance that, having learned about his incredible strength, the main character would decide to try again to join the famous sect, insisting on showing his talent in a test. As a result, the young master called the boy average, but the young man thought that he was so comforted. Anyone would have thought the same, considering how much time it took to find words. Even such an assessment did not upset the boy at all. He was ready to work even if he had no talent. His perseverance amazed the teacher. Jing Yun's second task, so he asked the student to comprehend the meaning of the sign, and further, no one planned to kick him out. The main character took this as an honor, so he planned to continue training as his mentor advised. In any case, it is more fun than doing daily tasks in Genshin. The most important thing for Chen Feng, they were not going to kick him out, which means he took the first step on his path to immortality. From the very beginning, the main character could not believe that so much meaning was put into an ordinary sign, but after studying everything in more detail, he realized that this was not the end. The sword path mark was filled with incredible swordsmanship techniques that allowed one to achieve enormous strength with long-term training. Soon it was midnight. Chen Feng was so carried away by understanding the art of the sword that he did not notice how quickly the day passed. Tired, he returned to his room. Despite being very tired, it was very difficult to fall asleep. There were a lot of thoughts in his head regarding today's training. The heaviness of his eyelids took its toll on the young man's body, so he began to slowly fall asleep, hoping to return to training as soon as possible. But as soon as he thought about the reaction of his senpai to such an average person like him, his sleep seemed to disappear. He was worried that despite Jing Yun's words, he might be expelled. It was difficult for him to accept this, because the goal of his life was to achieve immortality and study cool techniques, like those that iShowSpeed shows on its broadcasts. 3 whole years have passed since he entered this world. Getting used to the local rules and regulations was not so difficult, but the foggy future still frightened the young man. He remembered the poems that he studied upon arriving in this world. They helped calm him down. Now the guy was ready to work hard so as not to miss his chance. Confidence in his master reached an incredible level when he thought that a good specialist could make a masterpiece even from poor materials. To meet the expectations of the rest of the sect members, Chen Feng decided to continue his studies, putting in even more effort. When Jing Yun left the main character, he went to the old man to tell him about the incredible miracle he saw today. The sect's senior disciples' panic usually indicated bad news, so the headmaster began to worry greatly. Keeping calm and manners was very important. Besides, now they had a newbie. The head scolded the guy for being so overly emotional. A truly incredible thing happened, so Tenizu hastened to tell about it. The old man began to worry even more because he thought that the main character had guessed the real situation. Then, closing the door so that no one else would hear it, the senior student whispered in the master's ear about the unusuality of their newcomer. The old man thought that the older student was talking about the protagonist's lack of talent, but for their purpose, this was not required. It was only needed for quantity. But Kunyu clarified, everything was just the opposite. Chen's talent Fenya was so amazing that it's difficult to even find words to describe. It was not easy to believe. Then the master reminded that the students who lied to him were like monsters in the game PAL World will work in factories. Only the eldest student even swore that he was actually telling the truth. He had studied the Four Storms technique on his own, long enough to understand the young man's potential. This technique cost the elder as much as 200 gold, so he knew a lot about it. The hope was to glorify Ching Yun as the master of Four Lightning, but it was not possible. After which the senior student said that he had drawn only one careless sign on the ground, hoping to keep the guy busy for longer, but he showed an incredible level. It was not easy to realize that the main character had reached a level above pure flame in just one sign, with virtually no clues. The truth was that Chen Fung had reached the level of peak perfection and stood just a few steps away from true sword power. The old man's first reaction was real shock. It seemed as if he was about to have a heart attack, but just a couple of seconds later he began to laugh loudly. This was very good, but the elder brother could not understand why the old man was not worried at all, because they did not have the opportunity to keep such a talented escape. Then the old man talked about how the main character went through 50 sects and received 50 refusals. But if he decides to publicly show his strength, he will make many enemies. Envy is a terrible sin, but in the ranks of cultivators many have stood in one place for years. So if something is given too easily to someone, the attitude towards this person is simply terrible. The generation of cultivators to which the master belongs has always put fate at its head, and if such a genius came to them, then this can only be called God's will. At least that's what the head himself thought, but they didn't want to deceive the young man either. Once the check was over, the old man planned to tell everything. Until this happened, the senior student had to play the role of the fool, talking about how hard the newcomer should strive to reach the top. As a result, due to strong feelings, the guy decided to train throughout the night. The senior student went to the training site only at noon. Each repetition of the combination allowed the young man to achieve even higher speed and accuracy of execution. Soon he would become stronger than Saitama from One Punch Man. The guy himself didn't even know about his true strength, training the combination of 4 thunderstorms over and over again. Now only the sound of thunder has become quite tangible lightning. The young man was so engrossed in his training that he did not notice the approach of his mentor. He had to dodge several lightning strikes to get close. After sensing the 4 thunderstorms technique, the senior student could confidently say that he would hardly be able to win in a battle of skill. It was impossible to laugh and fool around in the presence of the main character. The pressure emanating from him reached a completely different level. Continuing to doubt himself, the first thing Chen thought of was Fen heard the voice of his elder brother, that he had come to report his expulsion from the sect. In a previous life, the guy was a writer with a very good reputation. He earned it through politeness and avoiding conflicts. Here he decided to use the same strategy. But in Ching Yun's opinion, there was no need for such politeness. Now they are only formally a student and a mentor, yet they are members of the same sect. But in fact, the older student was very worried that despite his incredible strength, the main character remained so kind and polite. When the mentor asked how many movements the younger student managed to comprehend, he apologized for his stupidity. Now he managed to consider 72 steps. Ching Yun believed that it would be impossible to surprise him anymore, only now he had to exert a huge amount of effort to make a sour face. He was very ashamed to lie to his student. He decided that he would ask for forgiveness after the master told the truth to Chen Fung. In order to advance his understanding of the sword further, the guy decided to clarify with his mentor some of the nuances regarding the technique. The senior student said that each of the techniques contains 96 movements, and skill is divided into 4 stages, but even achieving the last of them is not the final. After reaching the peak of perfection, the student must feel the true power of the sword, begin to accumulate it, and then comprehend this power. When all these processes were finally completed, a person could rightfully be considered a spirit sword master. Chen Fung now finally understood what he was working with. He needed to learn the rest of the techniques and then focus on achieving true strength. To get an additional boost of motivation, the guy decided to find out what level his mentor was at. Only the young man would hardly believe the elder student's words if he honestly spoke about his strength level. Roughly speaking, Ching Yun had just begun to study the 4 thunderstorms technique. Then the mentor turned around and confidently said that he was at the level of infinite sword will. He did not consider himself too talented because he had reached the peak only a couple of years ago. The young man did not fully understand how cool this was, but endless will sounded impressive, so he never ceased to be amazed at the strength of the older student. Noticing Chen's confusion, Ching Yun decided to talk about how to reach his level. All that is necessary is to go through the stage of comprehending true strength and train further. It was impossible to continue this conversation after the protagonist stated that he would reach the same mark in the future, so the senior student decided to leave. The difference between the two was so great that Ching Yun had to cheer himself up that he had the honor of being the mentor of such a great student. The will of the protagonist was indeed very amazing, so the master decided to observe the training in order to prevent the student from going astray. Such support seemed to Chen Fung did something incredible. He was determined to repay his older brother for his help when he finally managed to achieve great mastery. The next morning did not start out so cheerfully for the head of the sect. A second student was already rushing to him with bad news. They had problems again. Ready for dire consequences, the old man decided to run away while the opportunity still existed. He was not such a conscientious borrower. The head quickly calmed down when the second disciple of the sect, Cheng Shushu, said that it was not the collectors who came to them, but the postmen. This was the latest news from the main sect. It obliged all newly minted clans to issue spiritual stones to their mortal disciples without trying to profit from their privileges. If the stones were not given on time, the sect would not have a bright future. The master and student began to think about where they could get the required number of valuable stones. The situation was critical, so the old man ordered all the senior students to gather in the main hall. They were planning to hold another meeting. Shushu believed in his mentor, asking him not to despair because of temporary problems, but the head had to think carefully, so he sent the second student away. In order not to scare off the newcomer, they decided not to tell him anything about the current situation. Shushu still had things to do, so he hurried. After some time, all the students gathered in the main hall except the main character. Due to lack of sleep, the old man's eyes seemed teary. He dispelled the students' suspicions and then moved on to their serious problem, which could have caused the dissolution of the sect. This world had a much more varied monetary measure. Instead of dollars, they used coins made of different metals, as well as various spiritual stones and relics. It was too tedious to explain the state of affairs, so the head invited all students to read the paper in turn. 10 inferior quality spiritual stones were approximately 100 gold coins or 10,000 copper coins. Ordinary sects could hardly achieve this. Just in case, Ching Yun decided to check with their master how much money was left in their vault. In better times, the funds could have been enough for such an acquisition. The master mysteriously said that they had 13. One of the disciples relaxed. If they had so many spiritual stones, then there was nothing to worry about. Then the elder moved his head. This meant that they only had 13 gold coins. The senior student was sure that if they tried hard, they would be able to accumulate the required amount in a couple of months. All of the sect's finances were managed by their leader, so the others had no idea how bad things were. They now had 13 copper coins. It was very difficult to believe that after so many years of carrying out assignments, they managed to accumulate only 13 coppers. The elder asked whether Itzai believed that the money was embezzled by the head, but none of the disciples would dare to think in this way. Now they were incredibly poor. Then Ching Yun asked what led to this state of affairs. The money couldn't just disappear. But in fact, the old man invested all his money in Bitcoin because he was sure that it would take off. According to his friends, he could even receive interest from it every month. When the students found out about everything, they ordered the old man to quickly return all the money. They did not care about the interest, which the elderly man would lose. A month later, when he came to the man to receive his promised interest, there was no trace of this acquaintance. The situation was dire, but the problem could be friend, so Itzai asked how much money their leader gave to this man. There was no point in hiding anymore, so the old man said that he had invested about 100 or even 200 gold pieces in this business. This story sounded so stupid that some of the students considered it a prank. It was impossible to fall for such a simple scam. Then the old man said that they had not had such a large amount in storage for a long time. So out of the 200 that he invested, they had to borrow more than 100 gold coins. At this moment, each of those present thought about why they were even members of this wretched sect with a gambling old man as its head. He did not try to deny that all the blame lay with the elder himself, but only gathered everyone here today so that they could try to find a solution to the problem. If they failed to collect the sum by the required date, he was ready to go to the mountains of the snowy plains. This place was considered extremely dangerous, even though it could bring a lot of benefits. The old man knew about the incredible number of demons that lived there, but these were only extreme measures. He asked Ching Yun to stay here, and the rest to think about solving the problem. Correcting the situation will not be easy, but the elder managed to earn a good name for himself. He planned to borrow a couple of spiritual stones, but for now the senior disciple had to keep an eye on our Fen. Borrowing money to cover another debt was not the best strategy according to Jing Yu, but they had no choice. There must be some way out of any difficult situation, so the old man asked the senior student to become more serious towards the main character. The elder definitely had some kind of plan, so despite the mentor's past behavior, Jing Yu decided to trust him. 5 days have passed since that conversation. Chen's skill Fenya grew at an incredible pace. If they were in Van Piece, the guy would have entered the top 5 strongest swordsmen. The eldest disciple was worried about their leader. He was curious whether the old man was able to get at least one spiritual stone. In total, it took the main character less than 10 days to master all 384 movements from the 4 thunderstorms technique. The guy asked to help him with the next step. The young man doubted that he was following the right path, but his mentor did not see any problems at all. Now the main character was already significantly superior to him. To achieve the next level of swordsmanship, Chen Feng took a stance and began to gather spiritual power from the space around him. A few moments later, a stream of visible spiritual energy began to rush towards the hilt of the sword, and Jing Yu was sure that it was impossible to confuse the will of the sword with something. When the main character decided to strike, his swing was accompanied by the cry of 1,000 birds, and the power of the lightning charge was even higher than that of a Chidori Sasuke. Jing Yu's forehead even began to sweat. The newcomer was able to comprehend the spirit blade style so quickly, and also reach the level of true will without any problems. For the first time in his life, the senior student's self-confidence was shaken. In the same amount of time, he could only learn to hold a sword in his hand correctly. The sad expression on his older brother's face made the young man tense. He was worried, because he thought that he had done something wrong again. In order not to be left behind, the guy immediately asked for forgiveness if he made a mistake somewhere. He was ready to work hard and only become better. Watching the main character underestimate himself was very painful for the young mentor, but he promised the elder that he would not tell anything. Compared to Chen Feng, the eldest student was an ordinary weakling, so he told the guy that his main mistake was to strive too much. In fact, the young man loved to be lazy, but was worried that he could be kicked out due to inactivity. Having received permission to rest from his mentor, he could finally relax. Rest really wouldn't hurt the main character, because all the time he is in this world, everything that happens in his life is studying and training. But cultivators also had to rest in a non-standard manner. Jing Yu invited his student to relax and discard all disturbing thoughts. The guy did not argue with his venerable older brother, so he took a more comfortable position and began to enjoy the pleasant and refreshing breeze. Remembering what his younger brother said when he introduced himself, Jing Yu decided to ask whether Fen was actually a scientist. It was difficult to agree with this because the young man did not receive a license, but he studied for quite a long time, so he said that it would be more correct to call him half-educated. The young man gave up everything to take the path of cultivation. He was promised success in the field of research. His ideas were advanced, but he made a decision. The older student was sorry, because the guy's talent was truly unimaginable, although he was glad because he was finally able to find someone with similar interests. Jing Yu decided to clarify whether the main character was involved in the fine arts. The young man himself did not devote much time to this, but was familiar with the basics. The elder brother asked to draw him. He may not have been a successful cultivator, but he could compete even with Andrew Tate in his ability to make money. The main character had no idea that his mentor wanted to sell the painting later, when Fen's skill became known to the public and he reached the top. Soon the ink and canvas were prepared. The guy planned to quickly complete the portrait. He was not particularly good at it, but he wanted to please his mentor. The elder brother would have to stand still for a long time, he understood this, but maintaining a pose for a beautiful portrait turned out to be a little difficult. It took a whole hour to create the masterpiece. Jing Yu expected it to take several tens of minutes, but to his surprise, the main character tried. Cultivation also had an impact on other areas of the young man's life. His painting skills were indeed at a low level, but after comprehending the 4 thunderstorms, everything changed. Jing Yu was pleased because the portrait fully reflected his incredible strength. The only thing was that his face was too detailed. Everyone could see the imperfections of his skin. Now the elder brother had completely lost the desire to improve, because his student succeeded in everything at once. After the seal was affixed, the young man handed the package with the portrait to his mentor, although he was no longer so pleased. Although compared to his usual expression, Jing Yu now looked really happy, so the main character was also happy in the end. Soon, the head of the sect, An, using spiritual abilities, called the senior disciple to him. After a long period of time, the old man finally returned. Before going to the master, Jing Yu asked Chen Feng to continue his sword training. Resting for too long was also a harmful practice. The old master failed to lend money, but he had a great idea that would allow him to become richer than the Malfoy family from Harry Potter. On the way to his friends, the old man came across a popular pawn shop. They definitely had to have something left over from their forays. Pawning something was actually a good plan, but the senior disciple doubted that they had anything valuable left in the sect. Even if this method did not bring them money, the head was ready to turn to his sister for help. But Ching Yun was surprised that his mentor had any relatives at all. This woman was so greedy that after she made a fortune, Li Qingzhou gave her the nickname Rich Girl. Her influence was so great that even the memory of her made the man remember his youth, when his body was as toned as Joseph Joestar's. But if the mentor's sister really had so much money, Ching Yun didn't understand why they would go to the pawn shop if he could go straight to her. The master shook his head and said that this was only the most extreme solution, even worse than a dangerous journey, and all because of her quirks. Her main quirk was her love for strange people. She was literally surrounded by very unusual men. The guy didn't understand, since when good taste began to be considered a fad, he was even ready to stay for a while to get more funds for the sect. The master did not explain what exactly his sister's tastes were, but only said that first of all they went to the pawn shop. In the backyard of the Zanpakuto sect, the young man continued to think about his elder brother's words. He was ready for the test. The young man had one idea. He decided to test it. Besides, his strength was clearly not enough to disturb any of the local residents. Pointing his hand towards the rock, the young man uttered only one word: fly. This was necessary to realize how much stronger he had become after he began cultivating. His energy soon reached the desired point, and after that there was a strong explosion. Of course, it was not possible to demolish the entire mountain, but the force was quite high. The main character was happy because the sect was able to make him a strong fighter, even though before that, as he believed, he could easily be called mediocre. In the Jianya sect, which was located next door, training was also carried out. Young students who had embarked on the path of cultivation improved their strength. One young man with black hair stood out among them. His name was Xu Huan. His talent was recognized by other students. Many even began to consider him a leader. This young talent was able to master the spring storm from the 4 thunderstorms technique in a year. Not every mortal student could master this power. Many people praised him, considering him a real genius, but in reality he did not have even a tenth of the main character's talent, inferior to him in almost everything. Elder of the Mingjian sect, as well as second master Chen Yu, watched what was happening. They were not particularly pleased with the reaction of the other students. The strongest students were called young dragons. If among the geniuses there was one who could give the rest of the dragons a head start, he was treated even more specially. Although disciple Mingjian could not be called the most skilled, he was still better than disciple Chen Yu. That's why old people often quarreled on this basis. Another elder intervened in the dispute. He asked to remember that despite the master, each young dragon is, first of all, extremely useful for the entire sect. This year, quite severe requirements were imposed due to the purchase of instructions from the master, who invented the 4 thunderstorms technique. Only the rewards were also worthwhile. The 10 best students who could prove themselves during the competition would receive an invitation to the Sword Essence Tower. This place is sealed in normal times, but at its core it is an incredible treasure, the legacy of an ancient state that hides the secrets of their sword masters. In total, this tower has 981 floors. Each of these floors is under the protection of a keeper, and it depends on him whether the entering master can climb higher or not. The third elder asked his colleagues to monitor their students more closely, because the Jianya sect needed not only many followers, but also strong warriors. The spirit of competition flared up with renewed vigor. The old men were ready to place bets on whose student would be the strongest in the end. Meanwhile, in the nearest city to the sword sect in which the main character belongs, it was quite lively. News of the tournament spread throughout the country. Previously, the senior student himself took part in this competition, but the master was interested in the reward that the winner would receive. The prizes were quite generous. Anyone who gets into the top 500 will receive a robe of a sword master, and if you get into that 300, then 100 spirit stones. Those who take place from 1 to 100 inclusive will receive an even more generous reward, namely 500 spiritual stones or 5,000 gold coins to choose from. But that was not all. If you get into the top 10, you can get a floating blade. The top 3 will receive a pumped-up version of it. The winner of the tournament will receive a new product from Elon Musk's hovering spiritual sword, was of the highest quality. With a sufficient level of spiritual power, it could fly to the stars. The old man wanted to enroll students there as quickly as possible, but a pass for even one sword master cost 10 top-quality spiritual stones. Then the elder firmly decided that they would be lucky to take part next time. confidently turned around and began to walk in the opposite direction from the registration desk. Although last year Jing Yu could only take 500th place, this time they could have an order of magnitude better chances because of the main character. A true genius could bring not only enormous popularity to their sect, but also financial profit along with it. At that moment, the master saw the light. According to the old man, large trees always attract the wind, but they would have to return to the conversation later, because right now it was more important to get lower quality spiritual stones. The older student quickly noticed the change in his mentor's mood. It was obvious that he was definitely up to something. The road to the pawn shop was not that long. The chic building greeted all visitors with a huge sign with prices and name. When one of the employees invited the old man to come in, he pretended that he had no intention of doing so in the first place, hoping that this would help him get a better price. The arrival of Taoists was often an excellent chance to get rich, so the owner and his employees were very happy about this meeting. Rubbing his hands, the merchant hoped that heaven had given him such a chance for all those cases of failure when his cart was stolen. Plus, now he finally had a chance to get rid of his wife's influence, but he was a broke geek, so he didn't know how to do it, although he could learn it from Andrew Tate. The old man approached the merchant and said that they would like to get some money for the goods they brought. They had a whole bag. The experienced specialist had no idea about anything until he saw its contents. They were ready to bring more similar things. The arrival of the Taoist was like Pandora's box, but as soon as all the rubbish from the bag caught the merchant's eye, he immediately realized that there was some kind of setup here. The imperturbable appearance of its visitors gave hope that some valuable relic would be found among the garbage. To make sure of this, he called his appraiser to figure out what the matter was, and whether among all these useless things there was at least something interesting. To believe that the Taoist had brought something so useless, so the man decided to make sure that no serious mistake had occurred. But this was indeed the product they came with. If the merchant named an acceptable price, the master promised to return again. Then the senior student decided to use the Sigma gaze to get at least something, otherwise their whole path simply did not make sense. The merchant began to get very worried, even though his guests were offering to buy useless garbage, but at the same time they looked very confident. Worried that if the man refused they would simply kill him, he decided not to risk it and buy all the trash that was brought to him. Among all the rubbish, there were still several interesting things that were valued at several dozen silver coins. The employee even understood that his boss had made a difficult decision for himself, but he decided to ask again whether the old Taoist really wanted to sell his foot towel. Having hidden the goods forgotten among the goods, the man looked at his student. He was pleased that he took Jing Yu today. They were able to sell something only thanks to his evil face. All the goods that the two cultivators brought were valued at 1.5 gold coins, which was not so bad. There were still 98.5 left to get. The man decided to clarify whether the Taoists agreed with the proposed price. Then the old man asked to round up the proceeds to 2 gold pieces. But it was too much to round up a gold coin by half, but it was very difficult to refuse such a persistent buyer. Then the man noticed a strange scroll in Jing Yu's bosom. The point is that everything sold by cultivators now costs less than this rice paper scroll. 24 centimeters were worth 1 gold, and this scroll was about 192 centimeters. The master had no idea that his follower had such impressive wealth. He planned to take the role for deception. Then, in an attempt to justify himself, the older student told the master that the picture was drawn by his younger brother, and the paper was also his. The paintings were highly valued, so just in case, Jing Yu wanted to know whether this portrait was worth much. Only it was possible to earn a lot for art, only if its author was an eminent artist and not some newcomer. The student and the master looked at each other upset, because the chances that the main character was a famous artist were minimal, which means they wouldn't be able to get much for it. The paper will be used somewhere in any case, so even in this form it can be sold. The senior student decided to ban Chen upon his return Fenyu draw. The seal in the painting looked impressive, but the experienced trader did not believe until recently that it was something unusual. The man's reaction was very strange, so the Taoist whispered, preparing to run away in case the newcomer to their sect did something wrong. Then the pawnshop owner grabbed Jing Yu's hand, wondering if the author of this painting was really the scientist Qing Lian. The seal said that the work belonged to one of the most talented people in painting in their time. Qing Lian was considered a real genius of art. Now the protagonist's words that he only did a little painting did not seem as true. All the workers began to fuss, and soon they called their most skilled appraiser to determine whether the painting was genuine. Qing Lian's works had a special smell, so the specialist first sniffed the paper, from which he confirmed that it was indeed his work, and also done recently. It was difficult to believe that the famous Qing Lian had arrived in their city, because he did not stay in one place for too long, preferring to travel around the world. Such delight among specialists indicated that soon the head of the sect would not only pay off his debts, but would also be able to buy new furniture from IKEA. The old man and the senior student quickly decided on the price. They wanted to receive 50 gold coins for the work of a famous artist. When the pawnshop owner asked to name their price, the elder mysteriously raised his hand with 5 fingers raised. The merchant's face changed greatly. He asked for additional checks before concluding a deal, because the opinion of their expert was not enough. The old man's mysteriousness and his habit of not saying anything played an important role, because the owner of the pawn shop planned to buy the painting for 5,000 gold. They had never seen such sums before, so the eldest student began to think about what to buy for his silence. Even if the painting turned out to be a copy, the merchant was ready to buy such a high-quality item for 5,000 right now. The smell of money really attracted the attention of the sect leader, so placing his hand on the man's shoulder, he said that he had been misunderstood. He asked 50,000 gold for the painting. At this moment, everyone was shocked, including Ching Yun. He could not expect such a move from his mentor, and was sure that he still had a lot to learn. The senior student was even a little upset, because having asked for such a large amount, they would hardly be able to get even that 5,000. But such persistence convinced the merchant that if they were asking so much for the painting, it really must be the work of Qing Liang. Even the old man himself did not expect that his eloquent skill would work so effectively. Now he could afford to buy himself several floating swords to film a Van Damme-style promotional video for his sect. Since the pawnshop also has to earn money from its purchase, the man could not offer 50,000. Then Ching Yun decided to find out why such a handsome porter cost less than they asked for. The point is that Qing Liang's paintings are bought by high-ranking people. They value landscapes and images of animals. Few people would want to hang a portrait of a stranger. There really was logic in this, so the older student was not going to argue, but he was still a little offended. The man was ready to offer 10,000 gold pieces for the portrait, and if it had been without a face, the amount would have been twice as high. The master's attitude towards his student was sharply shaken, because of Ching Yun's face, they had just lost 10,000 gold. The elder agreed to the deal, suggesting that the pawnshop owner quickly call the experts because they did not have much time. The most famous appraisers were invited as experts. They earned a good name for themselves by helping the owners of such establishments out of fraudulent adventures. When all the people had already been invited, the senior student decided to ask whether they had started all this in vain. It would have been easier to agree to 5,000. Upon completion of the assessment, experts came to the conclusion that the painting was indeed painted by Qing Liang, but unfortunately, the picture depicted an unknown Taoist. This attitude turned out to be too cold for the sensitive senior disciple, so he drooped greatly after these words. When the head of the sect decided to ask the appraisers about the price, it took them a few minutes before they said in unison about 5,000. For 5,000, the man was ready to buy it right now, but the old man wanted to get more, so he named the price at 6,000 taels and not one less. Without having to think too long, the pawnshop owner agreed to this condition, shaking hands with the older student for such a treasure of the art world. The old man now wanted to make his final contribution to this business even more. He offered to pay 6,666 gold pieces so that the man's pawnshop would always avoid failure. The merchant could pay such a sum, but he is very infuriated by the old man who constantly comes out with his conditions. Soon the necessary papers were signed, and the representatives of the sword sect received their money. The master's joy continued to flow out of him. The owner asked the Taoists to come to him again if they managed to get their hands on something so rare and valuable again. He was most happy about the deal, because he was sure that he would get 2 or even 3 times more money for it. Walking down the street towards the sect, the master was very nervous. It was difficult to stop looking around when you have enough money in your pocket to build yourself a small castle. Before returning, like real, mature, and experienced men, the Taoists wanted to visit a few places where they could relax and enjoy our videos in the company of beautiful ladies. The next destination was a building with a signed secret pavilion. Ching Yun decided to ask again if the master had chosen the right place, because they could hardly afford anything here. But only in this place could one find the high-quality techniques and artifacts that their sect so desperately needed. At the entrance, they were approached by a beautiful girl who wanted to help in choosing goods, since she knew the entire assortment very well. The cost of local artifacts and books with practices made Ching Yun's head spin. He would have to save for many years to even buy a sword. The master came to write down the path of the high-class sword. This was necessary for the advancement of the sect, because at the moment, apart from the 4 thunderstorms, they have nothing to boast of. The scrolls were located on the 2nd floor, so the consultant was happy to show guests around so they could familiarize themselves with the assortment. But as soon as the master mentioned that they had come here only for the first part of the scripture, the girl's attitude changed sharply. Having learned that the guests did not have much money, she asked her colleagues not to rush with tea and also allowed them to use the cheapest one available. The senior student and his mentor did not like the changes, but they could not object in such a situation. There were a total of 3 scriptures in the shop at the moment. They were all good, so the Taoist had to choose 1 out of 3. The essence of the 3 elements of the Yang sword, Star sword, or Great River sword. Since the old man finally had money in his pocket, he was interested in how much this invaluable knowledge cost. Perhaps he could buy 3 scrolls at once. The master's aura changed greatly after receiving the money, but when the girl said that each of the scrolls was worth 5,000 gold, she and the student turned into a fire hydrant. The representatives of the sect were very confused by the price, because earlier when they bought 4 thunderstorms, they spent practically nothing. Then the consultant decided to explain. In Qingzhou, the 4 thunderstorms technique was very common. Now it couldn't even be called secret, so the cost was also reduced accordingly. In addition, the scrolls were further strengthened using the special technique of the secret pavilion. Telling this, the girl was unhappy that the poor came to her. Then, after thinking a little, the consultant realized that her salary was only 10,000 gold a month, which means that she could actually also be called a poor person. The amount was very large, so the old man asked if they could give them some kind of discount offer. In her opinion, poor people should help other poor people, so she talked about recent discounts in honor of an upcoming anniversary, so she could reduce the price by 10%. But even 4,500 was also too much, but it would be fair to spend the money earned on the creativity of a beginner for its development. The old man was surprised how the older disciple understood that the technique was intended for the younger one, but in their sect there was no one who came close to his talent. But the master agreed with the idea. Spending money in order to earn even more money is the first law of any Ty-Coon game in Roblox. Next, the elderly mentor decided to ask which of the scrolls would provide the greatest power, but it was difficult to answer this question because the girl was not a cultivator. Looking into the eyes of the master, one could say for sure that if he did not receive an answer, he would not buy anything at all. Then the beauty decided to be guided by the words of the manager. The Great River Sword technique was presented only in a simplified edition, but it was impossible to spoil the company's image. So for everyone except employees, it is complete. The woman couldn't believe that anyone would agree to buy such a not particularly useful thing for 5,000 coins. Then the consultant realized that this was the right option. She took advantage of the old man's gullibility and said that if his disciple really had a special talent, he could even learn the Great Sea Sword style through the first part. The old man successfully took the bait as soon as he heard about one of the 3 great sword schools, although the girl only came up with it a couple of seconds ago. Qianhai Sword Sect stood out for the power and sophistication of its techniques. A master who mastered them could fight hundreds of warriors at once. Even though they were both poor, the girl was glad to make such an insidious move. Despite the deception, both sides were happy. Besides the secret scriptures, the old man also bought a large number of chi pills, as well as several cold iron swords. The other disciples of the old man's sect have mastered different professions. Each of them will soon have a serious exam, so they also need to buy additional scriptures. Only this was not the final step in their strategy. Before transferring the Great River Sword technique to the main character, Jing Yu had to master it. The real problem was that the senior student would spend years studying this technique, so the old man planned to buy everyone in order to lure and keep Chen Fenya. Walking down the street, the old man heard the voice of a merchant who was offering a series of scriptures for only 10 gold coins. He was interested in this offer. Although these books were not suitable for cultivation, they contained many images of large pumpkins and skinless melons, so the interest of the Taoists only increased. They even had a bestseller in the series, The Night My Little Sister Knocked on My Room. And this book, in turn, was very interesting to Jing Yu. The old man wanted 3 series for 10 gold pieces, but the merchant said that he could really only offer 2 for that amount. Like a true bargaining master, the master turned around and said that they had nothing more to catch in order to get the coveted 3 series for a small amount. The senior student was a little doubtful, because the offer was indeed very profitable, but the old man only asked him to calm down and count to 3. Before the sect leader could even count to 2, the merchant agreed to provide 3 series for 10 coins, and the senior disciple was amazed at how smart his master was. But that was not all. Besides the scriptures, the old man also took the book that was in the hands of the merchant with the words, "This will be a gift." The titles of the books were very cool and pretentious, although in essence they did not represent anything. Jing Yu did not even know whether it was worth taking them at all. The book called Invincible Diamond Dragon Tempering Technique was the best in the man's opinion, but the senior student had already understood the principle, so he was able to get a discount on it. Returning back to the sect, the guys looked at pictures of the famous actress, but Ching Yun was not sure that such a thing was worth reading on the way. But it was bad form to condemn a master who only enjoys reading such literature in life. The old man still wanted to discuss something with the senior student. It concerned the painting that they had sold earlier. Ching Yun immediately thought that this idea was not particularly good, but the master asked him what he thought was really missing in their sect to compete with the three main ones. Without hesitation, the senior student replied that, in his opinion, everyone would work better if their master was a beautiful and mature mentor and not a grumpy grandfather. As soon as the old man heard this, he immediately used the instant strike technique to punish the harmful follower. In fact, their sect was sorely short of money since each student is doing his favorite thing. They need a lot of funds for advancement. A low-ranking sect earned about 200 gold coins a year. With this money, it was impossible to even buy secret techniques for some kind of alchemy. And the main character was able to earn as much as they would not have earned even in 30 years of hard work. It would have been too wasteful not to take advantage of such an opportunity. The master had a feeling that their sect could truly become great. Each of them would be able to capture a moment of greatness. After hearing this speech, the senior disciple stopped doubting. He was ready to make every effort to obtain another painting from Chen Fung. Now losing the main character is even more scary than before, because he is practically their gold mine, and he is an incredibly gifted cultivator. To give an incentive to train and show how powerful the main character really is as a student, the old man decided to enroll him in that very tournament. Ching Yun himself began to doubt this decision. Even though the protagonist definitely had talent, he was still trembling when he took fighting stances. Then the old man reminded his arrogant student how exactly he got into the top 500 participants without taking part in even one match. That time, the first opponent of the senior student was disqualified, and the second was injured. The third tried for so long to train his last hit on creeps in the League of Legends that his legs stopped walking. According to the wizard's predictions, the main character won't even need luck to get to the top 500 dollars. He could probably even get into the top 100 or even 50. If the young man manages to win for 7 rounds in a row, then he will become the first to achieve such results in the Ching Yun sect since its founding. Meanwhile, the main character himself continued to train, trying to learn the true power of his Zanpakuto. Combining rest, meditation, and practice, the young man managed to achieve significant success. While his mentor was away, he felt how endless the power of the spring thunderstorm was. The power of autumn storm is silent and incredibly fast, capable of reaching anything anywhere. Winter storm carried a mortal danger. Now the main character was finally able to see the truth hidden behind physical exercise and concentration. Now his every move seemed incredibly elegant and careful, and the lightning he released could destroy many masters in just a couple of seconds. Suddenly, an older student approached the boy, who was once again amazed at the power of their newcomer's spiritual techniques. If he took one more step, there would not even be a living place left of him. So by turning on Giga Chad mode, Ching Yun tried to hide the fact that he was incredibly scared. The mentor's menacing and silent gaze again frightened Chen Fung. He was not sure that a simple apology would be enough. The young man was left alone for just one day, and he made such a huge leap in mastering the 4 thunderstorm style that he could defeat his mentor with one finger. To break the awkward silence, the senior disciple handed over chi pills. The young man could train without food or sleep for 5 days if he used them. In addition, the sect leader also gave the young man a cold iron sword. From now on, he will only use it during his training. The boy was not sure how strong this sword was, but he had heard about the material while traveling around the world. The blade of this sword gave off a cold feeling. Ching Yun could not understand the reason for the protagonist's joy, given that the sword he called excellent cost them only 2 gold. As soon as the young man put spiritual energy into the blade, the older student realized that there are no bad swords. There are simply insufficiently skilled students. It was also necessary to carry out the master's order and get another painting. But when Ching Yun asked the newcomer, he said that he was not yet tired of practicing with the sword. To similar questions, Chen Fung had been preparing all these days, but the senior student was even more angry because he was bored with swinging the sword after half an hour. Apologizing to himself, Ching Yun rudely said that the main character should come to him as soon as he got tired of swinging the sword because he had a secret technique. As soon as the young man heard the word secret, he immediately got bored with waving his sword, so he moved like lightning to his mentor. People's moods are constantly changing, so he is already tired of practicing previous techniques and would like to learn something new. In order not to lose face, the senior student was forced to lie, so holding out the equipment he bought for a pittance, Ching Yun talked about how he accidentally found it in ancient ruins. The name Invincible Diamond Body Tempering Technique really impressed the young man, so he decided to make sure that his older brother did not need it himself. Then, like a ChatGPT guy replied, "Those who comprehend the path of the sword should not focus only on fighting techniques, they should develop themselves in all directions." Novices like the main character are not distinguished by their strength of body and spiritual root, so their training is an extremely important stage in becoming a swordmaster. Seeing the tears of the younger one, Ching Yun began to blame himself greatly, but he could not do anything about the deception, because it was an order from the head of the sect. The senior student asked the main character not to rush too much in mastering the technique. First of all, the young man had to fully master the 4 thunderstorms. The main character thanked his older brother and was finally convinced that the sect he had chosen was incredibly cool. The techniques he studied looked and sounded like they were designed specifically for the main character of some comic book. Chen Fung was even ready to give his life for the opportunity to advance on the path of cultivation. Now he became even more attached to the Ching Yun sect. The senior student himself hoped that the newcomer would not overdo it in mastering the techniques, otherwise they would not have enough books to buy. 3 days later at night, Ching Yun tried to master the secret technique that they had bought earlier, but the process hardly got off the ground. Even though the girl had previously said that with the help of special equipment, they accelerated the process of learning the technology. But in 3 days, the senior student could not make out anything. What worried him even more was how little time was left, since the youngest student would soon finish his training in the 4 storms and would need to be trained further. The guy hoped that Fen would need more time than he suggested, after which lightning began to strike non-stop in the place where the main character was training. These blows meant that the young man had completely mastered the winter storm. Now he could give a discharge much more frightening than Pikachu Ash from Pokemon. Even if the guy is able to somehow deceive the younger student, he will still get hit on the head by their master for failing to honor the Great River Sword technique. And given the character of their master, something much worse could happen. So Ching Yun was worried that he would be the first expelled student. Even though there really was little time, the senior disciple quickly came up with a plan. He was bad at cultivation, but hardly anyone could compete with him in calligraphy. If the guy changes the beginning, middle, and end of the scroll, it is unlikely that the main character will be able to quickly master this technique, having learned the secrets of the deep sea blade. Chen himself, Fen, meanwhile, finally felt the power of all the thunderstorms on himself. Now he only needed the will of the sword to collect this straight, like in poker. As his older brother advised, the young man was not going to rush into mastering the technique 100%. He wanted to move on to the practice allegedly found in ancient ruins. The young man was helped in his training by his incredible imagination. Even ordinary scribbles inside a book, which were more reminiscent of cave drawings, could help him in his breakthrough. The consciousness of the main character created a real film out of this, but from the outside it looked quite ridiculous. Like a fanatic, he stood on the mountain and peered into every letter. His mind created a whole scene in the vault of heaven, where the author of the technique Taikang Daozun began to teach him this secret treasure of the cultivation world. The preface stated that many masters of spiritual practices, in pursuit of increasing spiritual power, completely forget that they need to harden their body. According to the author, this practice would allow one to sweep away all obstacles in one's path only through physical strength. The master who wrote the practice believed that modern cultivators were very weak and could hardly withstand the power of his technique. This technique was supposed to bring enormous suffering to those who were not ready to learn it. At this moment, the protagonist's confidence was shaken. But since his older brother brought him this book, and he fulfilled the conditions for starting to study the practice, then there should be no problems. The young man's imagination again painted a golden glow. He was ready to move forward and test himself for readiness to receive true power. All stances and associations were clearly spelled out in the manual. The guy first had to learn the sky contemplation position. The author assured that if you don't have enormous talent, then it's clearly not worth pursuing this technique, but the guy didn't want to give up on his dream of becoming Hokage. We are transported to the country of Song, Bayan County, where Mrs. Taitsan, better known under the pseudonym Taitsang Daozun, was working on a new book. Invincible Diamond Body Tempering Technique was not her best work, but even so, it was often bought by mortals. The deadlines were pressing, the new work had to be completed as soon as possible. The beauty's shoulders were very stiff from such tension. Soon the editor himself came to see her. He wanted to quickly check the work so that they would correct the errors, and then immediately submit the new creation for publication. Taitsang still managed to finish on time. Each new work turned out to be more and more successful. The editor was sure that this one would also be a hit, but the girl was worried that she still had not received payment for the previous book. The editor asked not to worry, because he had never deceived a girl before and had no intention of doing so, so he handed her a stack. Here there was only a payment for the strongest chi concentration technique, but there was no money for the invincible diamond body tempering technique. Sales of the book on which the main character was working did not go very smoothly, especially compared to the works that the girl wrote earlier. Previously, the girl asked her colleague to find out about the competition from the World Academy. Admission to it should take place next year. Since there were no other assignments for the editor, Tai Kong allowed him to go do his work while she decided to return inside the house. The unpopularity of the invincible diamond body tempering technique was unpleasant news, but the girl wanted to know who the daredevil was who finally bought it. The next morning, the guy was still standing in a robotic pose. He still couldn't understand anything from this movement. He took another pill and was ready to continue training because he was able to master the 4 thunderstorms technique, which means that all he needed was persistence. The protagonist did not lose confidence in his abilities. He was sure that, even if just a little, he would learn this technique. Day after day, Fen tried to comprehend these notes without even roughly understanding what exactly he should do. At this time, Jing Yu created a Frankenstein monster from a previously purchased scroll, rejoicing that he had enough time. Only both of them at that moment were doing the most useless things without even realizing it. Several more days passed from that moment. It was not possible to realize anything using the information provided, so the guy fell down again. But he was not going to give up even under such circumstances. If the skill was not given so easily, it meant that he was incredibly cool. Having reached a dead end, the young man was wondering whether he should have turned to his older brother for advice. He wanted to show results as quickly as possible. Worried that in this case he would definitely be driven away, the main character decided to learn the new technique on his own. Understanding what it meant to gaze at the sky was too difficult for an inexperienced cultivator, so time after time he was faced with the fact that he could not awaken the power. Watching the landscape of the sky, the young man finally realized that the sky he sees is not the same sky that the author of the technology sees. The master who developed this incredible technique did not look at a specific star, but the universe itself came into his field of vision. This time the young man wanted to see the true sky, which is hidden from his unprepared consciousness and eyes. Understanding the basic principle, Chen Fung managed to transfer his consciousness straight into space. His soul was above the planet. He did not yet know that the awakening of this technique changed the environment not only for him, but also for all those cultivators who were nearby. Taoists from the capital of the Qin dynasty could not believe that the stars in the sky began to shine so brightly for no reason. This was such an important event that the elderly cultivator and part-time owner of the Tianji Imperial Palace wanted to report to the head about the miracle that had occurred. The incredibly beautiful glow of the stars was also noticed by Jing Yu, who had been redoing the technique all this time. Sitting in his room, he watched what was happening through the window. Having learned the path of the Vajra, the main character was able to materialize his Susanoo somewhere in space, but it was different from the one used by the Uchiha in the anime Naruto. Seeing this huge warrior, the young man finally realized what this stance means and exactly what relation it has to earth and sky. The technique he acquired turned out to be not so simple. There were only 5 stages in it, and the diamond body was only the first stage. The next version was the superior diamond body. It stood out for its high reliability and increased protection indicators. The third form was Vajra body, and the next stage was its advanced version. The final evolution of technology was the divine body Vajras, which made the user incredibly resilient and powerful. At its core, the position in which he spent several days is a reflection of a forge that uses the earth as an anvil and the sky as a hammer. The cultivation itself was an order of magnitude more difficult than what the main character went through, but the young man himself could not afford to complain about it. But let Chen's determination Fung had more than enough. There was not even one drop of chi inside his body now. A cultivator's skill level is divided into 7 stages, among which the first is the chi cultivation stage, followed by the foundation laying stage. These 2 stages are unlikely to be enough to implement the hammer and furnace principle, so until the guy makes progress in cultivating spiritual energy, he will stand still. Since he was not able to take this step now, the young man decided to comprehend the will of the sword in order to later become a master of the spiritual blade. When morning came, a tired senior disciple came out of his room. He had finally finished writing and was heading towards Fen. Jing Yu also thought about the lack of spiritual experience of his disciple. When he met the bandits at the first stage of chi formation, they beat him without any problems. Even though the guy couldn't refuse the master, he didn't want to send his younger brother on a mission with a high probability of failure. So he developed this crazy technique. The main character was glad to see his mentor. He looked great and very cheerful, as if he had drunk a monster energy drink. This time Jing Yu came not just to observe the young man's success, he wanted to teach him the second sword technique. Seeing how often he received new techniques gave Chen great encouragement. Fenya, because this meant that the sect had high hopes for him. There was a possibility that the older brother's words were just a test of greed, so in order not to take risks, the main character refused this offer, saying that he was too stupid. But in fact, the guy's talent was too frightening. In a month, he almost managed to comprehend all the techniques that had been taught for years. Gritting his teeth through reluctance, Jing Yu again lied to the beginner, saying that the second technique would be much easier to master. The senior student's efforts to suppress the truth seemed like anger to our boy, so he decided to agree. He believed that everyone in their sect was a genius and could master 2 techniques at once without any problems. He could not lag behind. Then, having finally received consent, Jing Yu asked the student to watch carefully because he would show the movements only once. Suddenly, the senior student froze. The main character thought that his mentor's speed was incredibly high, which is why he did not notice any changes. In fact, the senior student simply forgot the movements of the sword, so he stopped relying on muscle memory. But this did not help. If Chen Feng will notice his mentor reading the scroll, he could have guessed everything, so Jing Yu asked his younger brother to look at the sky. And then he began to read the first pages of the scroll with great speed, until the main character could not understand what he needed to pay attention to. As soon as the young man's gaze lowered, the older disciple began to demonstrate the movement from the scroll, creating many beautiful waves. The beginning of this performance really looked impressive, but as soon as the guy forgot the movements he had watched, his swings began to seem funny. Jing Yu himself hoped for the inexperience of the protagonist, because a beginner should not have noticed the inaccuracy of movements. Watching what was happening, Fen tried to find at least some hidden meaning in this show. He was sure that he was missing something important. Having finally remembered the movements, the senior student began to move smoothly, like a flowing river. Our boy immediately realized that he would not be able to withstand these blows. Then the main character came to an incredible conclusion. He decided that his mentor wanted to show how dangerous self-confidence can be. Now, the first part of the movements was completed. The beginning and end of the technique were taken from the book, but the middle turned out to be pure improvisation. To the surprise of the mentor himself, Chen Feng still managed to grasp the main meaning of these movements. Jing Yu decided to take this as praise. During the time that the purchased technique for transforming the body into diamond gained, this is all that the senior student could achieve. Since there is little left of the original technique in this technique, the mentor decided to call it the Sword of the Starry River technique. According to him, it takes almost a lifetime to comprehend this art. To meet high expectations, the boy decided to show his maximum potential. Defeating his younger brother was Jing Yu's dream, and now he was close to it because it was simply impossible to comprehend a technique that actually did not exist. Gloat over Chung Phenem. Even if he was an infuriating genius, it was impossible. So before leaving, the mentor added that failures in mastering definitely shouldn't be upset. He was already planning to go about his business, but there was something he needed to tell the main character about, but he couldn't remember what exactly. The eldest student thought for a long time, and then he was finally able to remember that in a few days, Brother Itzai would come to the main character to teach him alchemy. This skill sounded incredibly mysterious and intriguing, so the boy was in anticipation. During the time that the main character has been in this world, he has heard many times how complex science is, so he was not confident in his abilities. Although the mentor himself doubted that problems would arise, because Itzai was a real mediocrity who still managed to master alchemy. According to Jing Yu himself, Brother Yikai was much kinder and gentler, so there was nothing to worry about. Before leaving, the older student wanted to see what the younger brother understood from his movements. He hoped to see an epic fail. The main character didn't even have the opportunity to think about the movements demonstrated, but Jing Yu asked not to worry about it. He could wait. Besides gloating, this fake technology had another purpose. It was something like a guarantee that if the boy went crazy, hardly anyone could stop him. Otherwise, in the arsenal of a mad genius, there will be only useless art, not suitable for either combat or movement. This was one of the few cases where a senior student decided to go against the will of his master. He would suffer greatly if they found out about it. No matter how huge the rivers and seas were, it would be an order of magnitude easier to imagine them than the galaxy. And the guy had already reached this level earlier. It didn't take too much time to comprehend. 10 minutes of meditation and 1 vigor pill did the trick. The movements of the main character were somewhat reminiscent of Sin Chu. His blows were also fast, numerous, and beautiful. Small waves appeared from each swing. Believe in what he saw was impossible, because the technique that the mentor had previously shown to the main character was, roughly speaking, broken. The young man handled the sword so deftly that his reflected copies were visible in the water, as if he had been swallowed up by a huge tsunami. Jing Yun was still in shock. He could not understand whether this wave actually existed, or whether it was created by Chen's technique Fenya Mirage. During this short period, the boy demonstrated as many as 79 movements. While this was all he could see, he wanted to find out how it turned out to perform the technique. Continuing to overestimate the genius of the older student, the guy wanted to understand the principle of the technique even more deeply, in order to learn how to subjugate water. The senior student praised the main character. He said that mastering so many movements so quickly was a good result, and asked to continue studying. As night fell, the newcomer continued to master the Star River sword style, while his older brother Itzai practiced alchemy. Remembering the composition of many pills, medicines, and poisons was quite a difficult task for the young cultivator. I had to interrupt my thoughts due to an error in the composition, because the alchemist added an extra ingredient that served to create poisons. He blamed himself for not being able to remember simple things, but he felt even more sorry for brother Jingyu, who was crying on the roof not for the first time because of their newcomer. To cheer up the older student, Itzai wanted to show him exactly how to train neophytes. It was difficult for him to see his brother so sad. There are 3 great sects in Qingzhou: Thunder Sword Sect, White Cloud Path Sect, Pure Moon Sword Sect. Each of them succeeded in their own way, but there was also one similar feature. Each of the great sects attracted a huge number of young dragons, raising which they continued to glorify their name. Some of these capable students could master 2 different thunderstorms at once in a few years. Usually everyone started with autumn and spring, since they are the most flexible and simplest. Zhen Thunder Sword Sect Zhangqiang was extremely popular with his brothers and sisters, and was considered one of the greatest geniuses of our time. The young man himself was predicted to have a great future. The masters believed that in 30 years he would be able to achieve the synergy of all 4 types of thunderstorms, as well as learn the power of the sword. It became more and more clear that the main character is an anomaly of their world, along with Satoru Gojo, who could deal with anyone while playing, collided with Zhenjiang Qiang. They had to attend the tournament. The best talents from the Thunder Sword sect were selected to represent the clan at this incredibly important event, and the leader himself would train them. Many of the students were very surprised by this news, because the master always had a lot to do, and besides, he was a great man. The red-haired boy himself was the most happy of all, because he was considered the best student of the generation in the sect, and thanks to the instructions he would be able to advance even further. Only, according to the master, no one was allowed to relax. This tournament had to be different from those that were held previously, which means that only Zhen could have a chance. Among the other disciple cultivators, there were not many who could show a decent result, but nevertheless they were dissatisfied with being underestimated. The old man said that according to their information, some hidden sects will send their disciples to tournaments. There is no information about them, which means they are the black horses of the tournament. The attitude towards the hidden sects and their members was not particularly good, even though, unlike the dark cultivators, they did not harm others in any way. Once upon a time, there was a state in the world called the 7 Kingdoms. It was incredibly powerful and occupied most of the continent. Various technologies and spiritual practices were incredibly developed on the territory of the kingdom. Masters were able to reach incredible heights. But this paradise could not exist for too long. The legend does not name the reasons, but talks about the fall of the 7 Kingdoms. The surviving disciples from that era went to the mountains, founding their own secret sects. Their techniques were considered more advanced. The popularity of the great sects is not so high outside their region, but many of the secret sects are covered in legends and gossip. The sect masters gathered together in anticipation of their leader. The strongest cultivator was expected to return soon. To wait long for the Taoist 4 thunderstorms, he appeared almost immediately, as soon as his name flashed in the conversation. The great master was revered by each of those present, and the man himself wore 4 blades behind his back, which personified each of the seasons, and his hair reached to the sky. The meeting that was held that day had a much more important meaning than one could imagine. This topic was even more important than why his hair looked like the hairstyle of the adult Gon from Hunter x Hunter. The great master wanted to talk about the World Academy, a place where only the best among geniuses entered. The old men from the Council of Masters were interested in whether this educational institution was connected with the ongoing tournament. But the answer from the Taoist of the Four Thunderstorms was vague. He could not deny that through the tournament it was possible to get into the academy, but the winners did not receive a guaranteed invitation. It was more of an opportunity to show off their skills. The emperor planned to select the most talented followers from all the sects, and then send them to the World Academy to pass the exam. So this year, the Swordpath Master of the Imperial Court will be watching the ongoing tournament. It was an incredible opportunity for all Taoists. Getting the emperor's support was tantamount to winning the lottery. If a couple of students received the attention of this master, they would be able to leave Qingzhou and go to another region. The plan was extremely simple. You needed to train your students so that they would achieve incredible skill and impress everyone. And when they manage to gain the attention of the emperor, they will adapt to his request and will be able to gain true greatness for their sect. The emperor would have to send an incredible master. Everyone was eager to find out who it would be, and the great head was able to get a portrait of this great warrior. The swordmaster who was sent to them by the emperor himself, Ching Yun, it was his image that the Taoist of the Four Thunderstorms held in his hands. The council immediately saw incredible power in this man. His posture, clothes, and even hairstyle, in their opinion, spoke of enormous experience and hard training. When asked why the great master was sure of this, he asked those present to pay attention to the seal. This picture was created by the greatest artist of their time. The very name of Qing Lian already spoke volumes. A legendary master who unexpectedly showed his talent, he was known as the most talented person in the Chang dynasty. Even the emperor himself appreciated the work of the main character, so the head of the sect did not doubt even for a second that this was the master who would judge at the tournament. Taoist version, having appreciated Qing Lian's talent, the emperor asked to draw a portrait of his best warrior, even though there was no face in the picture. The power of the swordsman was preserved. Unlike the main master, his subordinates have a brain, so they asked if there was any evidence that could support the theory. Then the master put spiritual power into the painting, releasing the will of the sword from it. It was so great that it instantly went around the huge room. Previously, the Taoists had never seen such power, so now they did not doubt the authenticity of the information, because none of such powerful people could be unknown. Only those who faithfully serve the emperor can be so strong and at the same time hide their name. Now few doubted that this was really true and not an assumption. These are not all the secrets of the painting. It does not contain a drop of qi, but is capable of expressing such mastery of the blade. Such a powerful aura, and without a drop of spiritual power. Of the familiar characters, only the red-haired one Shanks from Van Piece was capable of this. When one of the masters asked where their head got this painting, he told about the story of the pawn shop, and also that the former owner was very similar to the depicted swordsman. Then everyone present understood that this could only mean that the inspection master had already arrived to them in Qingzhou. The Four Lightning Taoists suggested that this was the strongest swordsman of the Kang dynasty, nicknamed the Unshakable Sword. The masters seriously thought about whether they should go to the city where the pawn shop is located in order to properly greet the powerful warrior. The head forbade doing this because people who had achieved such mastery began to hate everything worldly and disturbing them. The chief master had a different idea. He proposed sending the students taking part in the tournament on a journey. They could meet this master on the journey and gain his favor. At the same time, the culprit of all the turmoil that had happened sat and could not understand how the main character found at least some meaning in his stupid writing. Soon, one of his sisters came to the eldest disciple's room. The younger Tien was worried because Jing Yu had not answered for a long time. Opening the doors, the guy really saw Tien linger. One had to behave with dignity in front of the younger ones. That's what the master told Jing Yu. She conveyed a message that the second brother should take care of the training of the main character, which means that the eldest student can now rest. Only the guy himself didn't understand anything, because training a newbie never really bothered him, considering that he appeared every 3 or even 4 days. Everyone had the impression that Jing Yu was exhausting himself to teach an untalented student the way of the sword. Chen himself, Fen at that moment, continued to master the Star River sword technique. It consisted of 99 movements, but the guy could only master 81 so far. If we draw a parallel, this success could be compared to memorizing all the material required for admission to Harvard in half a day. The young man's body training was interrupted by Xiao Itzai, who has finally arrived to help his younger brother understand the alchemical truth, Chen himself. Fen was not against doing something new, because his training was not particularly effective now. It was too difficult to move forward. According to Yitzai himself, alchemy is the same amazing art as the one that Jing Yu taught his younger brother. The guy was worried, because it seemed to him that he had been abandoned due to his lack of abilities. but his second brother supported him, saying that perhaps his soul lay more in alchemy than in the sword. The main character expected something like this, because for a long time he did not even have spiritual energy. Its eye asked the young man not to be upset, because the second eldest brother's alchemy was no worse than fencing, and besides, one could make good money from it. Hearing these words of consolation, Fen becomes even more uneasy, because he has always wanted to learn sword art. The sage said that if you purify the elixir well, you will not be afraid of any trials that you will encounter along the way. There are 3,000 paths in total. There are neither high nor low, but the line of alchemy conceals the secrets of heaven and earth. Studying with his older brother Itzai, he believed that a powerful alchemist was superior to any master, because these people, like Jesus, could turn water into wine. A single pill can drive countless strong men crazy, and a powerful alchemist can make 100 of them without any problem. But the truth was a little different, according to the second brother. Those who have reached the pinnacle of alchemy can turn all things into magical elixirs. A true alchemist does not purify elixirs, but purifies heaven and earth, creating from them something that can change a person's destiny. A tablet from an alchemist in this world could create a whole new feeling or impression for a person, but it was too difficult to explain. The explanation may have been as inaccurate as possible, but the younger brother still understood some of the truths of this wonderful science. The elder brother does not yet know about the main character's qualifications, so he can only teach him the most basic alchemy skills. It is worth remembering that there is a so-called medicine with 3 parts of poison. Between heaven and earth, each such elixir has its own toxicity or negative effect. The alchemy method that second senior brother will teach today is a non-poisonous alchemy method that does not have incredible effects, but is completely safe. Modern medicine in the world where the main character came from was truly advanced, but even it could not do what the pills could do. The guy wanted to learn a lesson from this experience, and this time not to anger his second elder brother, otherwise he would definitely risk being left out of the sect. This non-toxic elixir actually means creating elixirs without using any medical materials. The only problem was that it was not easy for the young man to imagine the process in which medicines were prepared without the appropriate components. Heaven and earth are filled with spiritual energy, which can be directly condensed and used to make elixirs. Even though the main character could see the example right in front of his eyes, it seemed too unrealistic to him, so he could only look around. Junior brother Chen clearly understood that all the steps of this non-toxic alchemy method were written in this book, and he would be able to understand them faster from it. Itzai will only take part in the training once the guy can produce an elixir of the same quality, and until then, he must train hard. Thanking his older brother for his advice, the boy began trying to recreate this incredible remedy that could solve many of his problems. The tablet was needed not only to gain additional reputation from other students of the sect, but thanks to its help, the guy could begin training spiritual power. Teaching younger students is not an easy task, so after teaching the lesson, Itzai wanted to play Mario a little on his Nintendo Switch. Ching Yun's day off went just fine. He spent the whole day relaxing in bed doing nothing, a real happiness for any busy person. When suddenly someone unknown tried to enter his room, the Taoist quickly reacted by taking his sword and bringing it to the man's throat. The young man's eyes gradually got used to the darkness, and he saw that his night guest was a master whose head had even more gray hair. It was a little difficult to believe that the master went for a walk, because there was a sword behind the old man's back. The master's wish is to promote his Ching Yun sword sect to a third-class sect. He came here for this very reason. The main character was an incredible opportunity for them to make it to the top of the world of spiritual arts. As long as no one knows about the young man's talent, there is no threat to them. Now, his probability of getting into the top 100 is almost 100%, but if they take it higher, then there is a chance to glorify the name of the sect throughout Qingzhou. As soon as his talent was revealed, he would definitely be lured away by other large sects. Not only the senior disciple, but also the master understood this. But the old man really thought about the words of his student, whether they should continue to deceive him, because of them he was literally wasting his time. Jingyu was sad that such a talented person like his younger brother would spend the rest of his life in the Ching Yun sword sect. He could go up to the sky to hug the moon, but they want him to be locked in the mountains and forests as a turtle. Such wise words even touched the eldest disciple. True, this did not explain why in the middle of the night the old man came to the Taoist's chambers with a sword. Then the master was forced to tell. He received news that the Vaju mountains were inhabited by spirits. The elven ore they drop is a very good material for refining flying swords, although it is only a mid-tier ore. Even if this was not a particularly valuable material, if you look at the issue globally, it could become a support for the main character in the tournament, because they could turn the ore into a sword. The mountains that the master planned to go to were filled with terrible monsters and monsters. Any wrong step could lead to death. But the old man was not a fool, so taking unnecessary risks was not part of his plans. He wanted to hunt monsters on the outskirts, where the monsters were much weaker. Ching Yun himself expressed his desire to help the master on this journey, because he also did not want to deceive the main character, and thus decided to forgive his sin. The master was against it, because if something happened to them, then the sect, even if it was so mediocre, would not be able to exist for a long time. Besides, the old man was in too bad a condition for such to hunt, which meant that his chances of returning intact on his own were quite low. Such arguments nevertheless convinced the old man to accept the offer of his first student. They decided to set off immediately, without waiting for dawn. The old man and Ching Yun definitely haven't played the Dying series light, otherwise they would know that hunting for valuable materials in places full of monsters is a bad idea, especially if carried out at night. Meanwhile, the main character continued to sit at the book. Alchemy was an order of magnitude more difficult for him than swordsmanship. His attempts to learn the basic principle of creating elixirs continued until the morning. Now he could not boast of his vigor, because the pills had run out. Such quiet and beautiful landscapes make people miss poetry, but the young man literally had no time to return to his roots. To create an elixir, you need to use your own aura as a conductor to attract the aura of heaven and earth, then carry out a few more machinations and only then condense it. This is the only way to successfully refine the pure free elixir, as Chen had previously instructed Feng Yu as his second elder brother. Remembering his past life, the guy decided to look into the library in Jianzhong right now. He hoped to find answers there to the questions that were tormenting him. In the novels, the Sect's library is a carefully guarded place, but the door here was actually open. Surprisingly, this corner was much more chaotic than the other rooms. After seeing so many books, the guy again decided that the Ching Yun sword sect was a first-class hidden sect that was rarely found. Because of the protagonist's fantasy, the more he knew the secrets of the sect, the more effort he had to put in to maintain a normal mind. Otherwise, the guy would definitely be considered to have a bad conscience and expelled from the sect, and he was afraid of this now most of all. Moreover, Elder Brother once said that techniques should not be practiced casually. If they are not suitable, they will only harm the Taoist. There were a lot of intriguing names around, but the guy couldn't stay there any longer because he couldn't find any books on alchemy. He decided to go to the second floor and was right, because there were several times more books there than he had previously seen. Now he could continue his search. Chen's advantage Feng is that he is very patient, so he could study something for a long time, even if it did not give visible results. The landscape records only record Qingzhou in this world. There are many practicing sects scattered in Qingzhou, but at the same time, there are also full-fledged dynasties. Since the main character was transported to this world, he didn't know much about it, so since problems arose with alchemy and there were no necessary books, the boy decided to study their world better. The strength of the imperial dynasty was comparable to the strength of the immortal cultivation sect, and even slightly surpassed the strength of ordinary cultivation sects. This answered many of his questions. This difference was due to the fact that the dynasty can focus its efforts on big things and devote all its resources to all the promising newcomers. However, the immortal cultivation sects fight independently, and it is difficult for them to concentrate all their strength. They only limit each other, losing the opportunity to become a real threat. The guy joined the highest hidden sect, which is superior to everyone at once, at least he thought so. So in the end, he was not worried about the state of power in the world. Ching Yun Sword Sect can obtain any secret book, and this is enough to shake the world because as we know, knowledge rules everyone. Having stopped shouting pretentious phrases and waving his arms, the young man continued his intensive training because the elixir will not improve itself. The young man was interested in many of the works collected in this place. They could not be compared with his electronic collection in that world, but here secret knowledge was hidden, and not stories about Howl's moving castle. The guy was distracted from studying by the voice of an unfamiliar girl who wanted to attract his attention. It was the same sister who came to the older student. In their sect, she was number 7, and they met the main character for the first time, one way or another. Tien was glad to see their newcomer. However, she did not understand what exactly the young man had forgotten here, if he had to comprehend the path of the sword not far from the mountain. Then the guy decided to share his problem. Spiritual practice caused him certain difficulties, so he came here in search of a solution. After being in the Ching Yun sword sect for so long, Fen saw a practicing elder sister for the first time as he expected. She was very beautiful. She knew about the replacement of the tutor for the main character, so she was surprised that he did not go to him with this question, but decided to look into the issue on his own. But according to the young man, brother Yikyang was too busy. This made the girl a little angry because the training should have been more responsible, but she decided to help the newcomer herself. Since the elder sister was well versed in cultivation, she promised to show him some secrets a little later, but for now the boy had to work hard. The girl quickly realized that the main character was a good-natured person, so she decided to treat him with something tasty next time to cheer him up. One of the local books still did not want to leave the young man's head. He asked the seventh sister if he could take this book for a while. Only she didn't understand why she needed to ask about this. The guy had already become a member of the sect, which means he could study any materials without any problems. The book he chose, Miraculous Breathing Technique, is actually just a basic secret book in the eyes of the young elder sister. The young man still had little understanding of how the power of technology works in this world, so he was interested in what god-level skills were the real secrets of their sect. The girl still had a lot to do, so she asked the newcomer not to sit too long with books, reminding him of the importance of rest, and then left. The library was filled with many incredible and powerful techniques. This is how the main character saw it. He wanted to take them all, but stopped at one for now. Tien was also aware of all the affairs, because the master at the meeting asked each follower to lend a hand and hide the truth about the state of affairs from the main character. Having opened the book with the technology, the guy's imagination began to play again. A golden light came out from the pages of the book, and its content seemed even more mysterious than it already was. The book says this: "Man is the head of all spirits, and in his body there is hidden a charm that leads to the heavenly palace, where 33 acupuncture points are hidden." It sounded very cool, so the guy hoped that his strength would exceed 9999 if he studied this book to the very end. It was also stated there that when acupuncture points of the 3rd, 13th, 23rd, and 33rd levels are activated, additional physical talents will awaken. Since the guy considered himself the most terrible disciple in the entire sect, he wanted to use this information to get on the same level with his brothers and sisters. The first stage of the main character's new training was meditation. He sat down in a deep, dark forest and began to try to imagine all the points on his body. Doing this was as difficult as counting all the raindrops that fell over a certain period of time. The more the main character concentrated on this, the stronger the feeling was, as if his consciousness was being carried away by waves to some other place. When the guy carefully examined all the objects surrounding him, he finally realized that all these lights were his acupuncture points. He finally delved into his Tien and discovered the first level of points that could help in enhancing spiritual as well as physical strength. Only here too it was necessary to absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, but the guy could not figure out exactly how to carry out this process. Hoping to get an answer, he decided to scroll forward a few pages. If there were no clues in this book, then the chances of completing the training were minimal. But after scrolling through all the techniques to the end, the young man was convinced that there were no notes on how to introduce spiritual energy into the body. The method must be able to attract spiritual energy into the body, since it sounded like the main activity of any cultivator. The guy was worried that he might have missed something important. Chen Fung began to work hard to find a way to inject qi into his body, but he did not know that once this was done, he would become a great power at the Master Founder level. As with the 4 thunderstorms technique, what he had to do combined several different states at once. To achieve some result, Chen Fengyue had to spend more than 20 days on constant and exhausting practice. The young man actually managed to take one step, but even so there was no way to get around the dead end. It looked like a laser maze from a Mr. Beast video. But even our diligent student sometimes needs a little break. The lack of understanding of the concept and constant failures frustrated Fen. He couldn't think of anything to cope with the task. Any attempt to absorb spiritual energy into his body only ended in pain in his stomach. Since there was no one to ask for advice, it was the middle of the night outside the window. The boy decided to draw something. This time the main character decided to draw what he saw every day, a painfully familiar landscape. He was happy and sad at the same time. Art did not allow us to completely relax, and thoughts of cultivation continued to haunt our boy. Only Chen finally received the hint from his painting. In the process, he noticed one pattern that could be applied to the concentration of spiritual power. Every time the young man painted landscapes, it was as if he became one with them. Then he decided to try to become one with heaven and earth. At first glance, this idea sounded very stupid, but as soon as I tried it, the young man's body was immediately illuminated with a bright golden light. Chen Fung relied on a random feeling to pave his way, and successfully laid the foundation. But he only thought that he had reached the desired level, although this was not the case. Despite the surge in spiritual power, the young man did not intend to become arrogant. He needed to improve the elixir taught by his second eldest brother as soon as possible. The flash of power was also noticed by Yi Qiang, who was nearby and reading his favorite book, and his third brother was with him. This situation could not be called standard, so the guys were very tense, expecting some problems. The doors behind the brothers opened, and in the opening one could see a plump figure who had definitely not come to say hello. This farmer was a tax collector who came to the old man's heart, but since he was not with the senior student, the responsibility fell on the others. Yi Qiang realized that since there were no mentors, the role of an assassin, like John Wick, he must fulfill it. Otherwise, this scoundrel could harm his loved ones. Before the attack, the man asked who was responsible. Because today was the day to pay the immortality tax, he advised not to try to escape. Since there was only one tax collector, the guys thought that they could get out of this difficult situation. But soon another tall one approached the pot-bellied man. His name was Wang Mao, and he was the central manager of one of the responsible organizations. The second and third brothers finally realized that they were facing huge problems. They really regretted that they did not stop the master and senior student. They both competed, hoping to collect more spirit stones and then receive a bonus. Wang Mao reminded his colleague that Daqian Chao Tang had put a lot of effort into collecting the immortality tax. It was difficult to understand what the collectors were talking about, but representatives of the sect hoped that these two would simply beat each other and leave, at least today. If they did not give up the spirit stones, then the Ching Yun sword sect would be closed today. There were no savings left, so the issue could not be resolved. Turning to the collectors, the brothers asked to give them a few more days. The sect really could not pay for so many spiritual stones. But according to evil men, if there is no money to pay for the tax, then you should not create your own sect at all. Soon the seventh sister came to them. Tien did not notice that there was a showdown, so she wanted to invite the brothers to dinner because their practice had already been delayed. The girl was pretty, so these two cruel collectors wanted to take her away for non-payment of debts. The second and third decided to stand up for the beauty. They asked Tien to return to the courtyard, but it was too late to take any action. The bad guys surrounded them, leaving the girl no chance to retreat. They planned to carry out their plan and kidnap her sister. The guys also began to protect Tien, while she still did not understand what exactly was happening. Both brothers were knocked out with just one blow. The collectors used different elements, so it will be very difficult to defeat them. Confidence in their abilities forced them to make the same mistake as all the villains in any superhero movie. These guys did not finish off the brothers right away, but decided to talk a little. They boasted about how many rewards they would receive from the right people when they handed over Sister Tien to them, and they also vividly described what exactly they would spend the money on. The collectors laughed because in this pathetic sect there was no one who could resist them, and among them there was a real beauty. Even though the brothers were incredibly upset, they could not oppose Rao because their level was too low for the battle. Then the main character appeared on the battlefield. He came because he heard Sister Tien screaming, and besides, he finally managed to make the necessary elixir. The villains warned that the guy would end up on the ground, like the two who had already tried to protect the girl. The elders also convinced the young man to run away, because they did not know about his incredible strength, as well as destructive abilities. Until the very end, the main character did not understand what was happening. But when memories from an old manhwa surfaced in his head, he immediately realized that those same evil cultivators were in front of him. He was not going to hold back against such bastards. He had no combat experience, and according to his senior student, he was an average guy. Chen's bravery. The collectors did not like Fen. They wanted to teach him a lesson in politeness since they were much older than him. Even though his older brothers continued to try to dissuade the young man from such a senseless death, he was ready to put his life on the line. Besides, he didn't plan to die, but planned to plunge these two into their worst nightmares. Freddy Krueger missed them for some reason, so he'll do the job himself. The main character had given a really impressive speech earlier, but he wanted to end the conflict without fighting if possible. No one believed in his strength, suggesting that he was just pretending to be tough, hoping to scare off the bad guys. But as soon as the two got close, he attacked them using the secret-style Star River Sword, which was very effective. It only took a few seconds to deliver the fatal blow and defeat these bandits. The young man had no doubt at all, because he again turned out to be very stupid. Once the collectors were killed, the guy scratched his head and asked if his brothers and sister were okay, because he was very worried about them. The amazed guys, just in case, decided to make sure whether the main character really killed these two. He did not doubt his decision at all, because he believed that these were illusions created by his second eldest brother to prepare him. The situation was actually incredibly dire. They had just killed two important people who were collecting debts. Now it was not possible to avoid trial and punishment. The third brother was well acquainted with the laws and figured out how many years in prison they would be given. Sister Tien was only concerned about the amount of gold that the collectors managed to collect because they usually came to them 10 or 12 times in a row. This reaction greatly surprised the other members of the sect because there are actually 2 killed villains, and the girl only thinks about money. Yitzai wanted to take responsibility at least this time. He ordered his younger brother to go back to training and pretend like nothing happened. The guy continued to think that these two were an illusion created by them with the help of their great supernatural abilities. So he just smiled and thanked his senpai for his kindness. He promised to keep what happened that night a secret. When he returned back, the other sect members could not understand whether it was really safe for them to accept such a newcomer into their midst. In the worst-case scenario, they could be killed by him. Then the guys finally decided to protect the interests of the main character, and Tien was finally able to start searching his pockets. The second brother had already come up with a plan. Of course, he was not such a powerful alchemist to return the soul of the dead, as did Full Metal Alchemy Edward Elric. But he had a special remedy that could help solve their problem in this situation, although not completely. The remedy used turned the bodies into coal and ashes, and the third brother and seventh sister firmly decided that they would never touch the elixirs that they Itzai. Although the corpses have been destroyed, the matter is far from over. They need to prepare in advance because soon people may come to check. The girl again plunged into her beloved money, and the third brother was interested in what exactly the guy was planning to do, because the situation was really very serious. Itzai himself was motivated by not-so-noble goals, so if he smelled something fried, he was ready to quickly leave their sect, change his name, and hide. There was another option. In fact, the two of them cannot be held accountable under their laws, because the murderer is their younger brother. While the main character was thinking about how lucky he was with his older brothers, the second brother knocked on his house and had an important conversation. He came so late to invite the young man to take part in a mission for their sect, the guy immediately caught fire and wanted to leave as soon as possible. The second elder brother did not go into details of the mission. It seemed that he was ready to lend him a helping hand. The main task of the mission was to hide so that no one would find him. The main character was happy because his beloved older brother would help him, which means that now everything should really go like clockwork. The guy motivated himself even more strongly by the fact that if he didn't try, he would soon simply be expelled from the sect. Having passed through dense forests, the guys came to some small village. One could see how the locals were enjoying life. The second brother could not believe such coincidences because he simply led the young man in a random direction, hoping to hide him from the people from the imperial palace. But he could not even imagine that in the end they would have to face such adventures, because right now a huge snake was raging in the village. Itzai had no spider sense, so he did not even know that the huge snake was already going to dine with his help. Our boy took this meeting for the very mission that the second elder brother was talking about. Fen wanted to test his strength after all the training. The older brother was worried about his kohai, but he asked to trust his abilities because he was well trained by Ching Yun. It seems that Itzai still did not understand how dangerous a cheater the main character was for this world. He could easily deal with most of the monsters of this world. Therefore, he began to read a prayer and promised to bury the guy with dignity, despite the fact that their sect has no money, even to pay debts. Locals were in a hurry to escape from the terrible monster, but one little girl stumbled and found herself in mortal danger. Then out of nowhere, Chen appeared. Fen left the giant monster with his low-quality sword. The snake weighing a ton could not even move the boy. Since the danger for the baby had not gone away, the main character sent her by the fastest route towards his older brother, the alchemist. Since Itzai did not expect such a delivery, it was difficult for him to catch the girl, but he still coped with this task, managing to grab the baby at the last moment. The battle between the giant serpent and Fen continued. They circled, trying to find the right time to strike. Holding the child in his arms, the guy remembered how once upon a time his orphan was picked up by a sect master. He had never thought about it, but was very grateful to him. Even though the snake was only hunting for the boy, it could inadvertently harm other people, so he decided to take it a little aside. The second older brother was amazed at how agile the main character turned out to be, because he managed to bypass the monster and lure it away from the city. The Taoist would like to join the battle to help his partner, but Yitzai wondered if he had other things to do. The words that the guy was inferior to his younger brother in power hurt him greatly. He didn't even know how to adequately respond to this. He couldn't offend the child, so he decided to teach the little girl that even among cultivators, not everyone fights the same way. At the same time, the guy continued to deftly evade every attack of this monster. Even if Itzai wanted to help, the young man's strategy was solitary. The best disciple of the Thunder Sword sect was watching from one of the highest cliffs. He had heard about the anomalous monsters of these circles. But he couldn't even imagine that we were talking about such a pathetic snake. He planned to kill it and glorify his name as a savior. It only took him 10 years to refine the Spring Thunder Vision Sword and gather the power of the Spring Thunder Vision Sword. Even though the main character himself behaved incredibly courageously, he was unable to hide his fear of such a monster. His legs were shaking. A very proud boy showed up on the battlefield. He immediately understood which sect Chen was from Fen. Knowing that Ching Yun was a bunch of weaklings and second-rate cultivators, he asked him to leave quickly. Otherwise, he would not bother protecting the guy. As soon as he finished this speech, he turned towards the snake no less pathetically and promised to introduce it to his 10 most powerful techniques. Third-generation Thundersword sect disciple Zhen Zhenqiang used Spring Thunder to finish off the snake. At the sight of the lightning strike, a strong explosion occurred. Clouds of dust covered the battlefield and the main character could not understand who emerged victorious from the duel. Soon, when the snake continued to move, the young man was able to notice Zhen, who was holding back the monster's mouth with his last strength. The main character doubted whether he should interfere, because a boy from another sect promised to handle the snake on his own, even though it was the size of Jormungandr from the God series of Games of War. The representative of the Thundersword clan was about to give up, but noticed that another cultivator was rushing towards him. The guy, as a gesture of goodwill, decided to use the same technique, severely hitting his temporary ally. Chen's reception Fenya turned out to be an order of magnitude higher, so soon the snake was cut into sashimi, although the main character himself understood that he could have handled it faster. The boy himself could not be sure that his reception looked beautiful, so he wanted to ask the second eldest brother about it. He felt sorry for Zhen Zhenqiang, because his landing was not so soft, but the young man was not going to help those who wanted to steal other people's loot. Only the red-haired cultivator's attitude changed greatly. As soon as he saw the power of Fen's sword, he wanted to make sure which sect the young man belonged to. The situation with the rescue seemed too far-fetched, so the main character assumed that this was another illusion of Itzai. Zhen Zhenqiang saw that the guy who saved him was not in the mood to talk. He understood his mistake, because he himself initially turned the stranger against himself. In addition to getting acquainted, a cultivator from another sect also wanted to discuss the demonic pill that was left after defeating the snake.